The Stormbringer is a female Imperial between the age of 18 and 22. At age 10, the girl's mother was assassinated for reasons her father refused to reveal. She was then shipped off to Shimmerine as a political hostage for the Thalmor, in accordance with the wishes of her father. Shimmerine, the City of Lights, is a city on the eastern part of the Somerset Isles. In Shimmerine, the Stormbringer was able to learn Destruction, Enchanting, and Restoration. As a political hostage and a valuable tool of diplomacy, the Stormbringer was never harmed physically. However, many of the Altmer were racist towards her, making life in Shimmerine difficult. Several years after arriving in Shimmerine, the Stormbringer met an Altmer boy who took pity on her, and he taught her some of the more obscure schools of magic, including Conjuration and Alteration. While she was with him, the Stormbringer was happy for the first time since leaving Cyrodiil, but alas, this was not to last. One day, her Altmer friend was slaughtered by Thalmor agents for associating with a human, and his body was then hung atop a city tower for all to see. Trauma from the experience caused the Stormbringer to hate the Thalmor, the Altmer, and most of all, her father, who was responsible for sending her to this wretched province. One day, the Stormbringer received word that her father was dying of an unnatural sickness. Her father urged her to stay put, but the Stormbringer did not heed his warning, and she set off for the Imperial City in secret. She snuck into her father's chambers, and as he lay upon his bed, dying, the Stormbringer looked at him with hatred and disgust. "Why did you send me to that awful place?" she asked. Her father's strength fading, he replied, "Sometimes, it's best to keep those you love far away." Realization hit the Stormbringer as she understood why she had been sent away. Following the war, many were unhappy with the White Gold Concordant and hated the Empire, meaning anybody with royal ties, especially a young child who was heir to her father's position, was in danger of being assassinated. Her father had shrewdly sent her away, for he knew the Thalmor would not harm political assets. Ironically, the place the Stormbringer was safest was right in the thick of her enemy's lands. Finally coming to terms with her past and her father, the Stormbringer set out not for Shimmerine, but for Skyrim, wherein change and rebellion were brewing. So began her journey as Dragonborn. After years of masking her personality in the Somerset Isles, the Stormbringer is very manipulative and cunning. She is perfectly fine with doing evil things if she believes it will ultimately benefit those close to her or the greater good as a whole. However, from an outsider's perspective, the Stormbringer may be seen as an evil person. She has little interest in factions themselves, but is apt to join them and use them for her own personal goals. The reason for Imperial as the choice for this build is primarily for role-playing. From a purely functional perspective, the Altmer is probably better, so you can choose that instead if you wish. I'm going to leave talk of health, magicka, and stamina investment for the end of the video, because it's a bit complicated with this character. For your standing stone, you should definitely choose the Atronach stone for 50% spell absorption. In combination with Mirak's gear and the Atronach perk, this will make the Stormbringer completely immune to all magic. The primary skill the Stormbringer focuses on is Destruction. The most important spell she uses and the spell she gets her name from is Lightning Storm, which does an absurd 112 points of damage per second. Using Enchanting, the Stormbringer reduces the cost of all destruction spells to 0, meaning you can cast Lightning Storm infinitely. This is extremely overpowered and destroys pretty much everything in the game. The only problem with Lightning Storm is it takes a while to charge up. This can be both annoying and makes you an easy target. To deal with the charge up time, simply revert to expert destruction spells like Incinerate and Thunderbolt on weaker enemies. Against stronger enemies, like dragons, dragon priests, and other creatures of that caliber, use the Become Ethereal Shout while charging up to make you invulnerable. You will need the following destruction perks: Novice Destruction, 2 stages of Augmented Shock, Disintegrate, and 2 stages of Augmented Flames. Finally, because we're using Enchanting to reduce the cost of all destruction spells to 0, you actually don't need Apprentice, Adept, Expert, or Master Destruction. The next major skill for the Stormbringer is Alteration. Alteration is necessary for Mage armor spells and paralysis. The Stormbringer will need the following Alteration spells: Paralyze, Mass Paralysis, Ebony Flesh, and Dragonhide. Paralyze will allow you to immobilize your enemies, and then destroy them with Lightning Storm before they can do anything. Ebony Flesh and Dragonhide will significantly reduce physical damage taken by this character, which is essential because she wears no armor. I recommend dual casting Ebony Flesh for weaker enemies and dual casting Dragonhide for stronger enemies. you will need the following alteration perks: Novice Alteration, Alteration Dual Casting, Apprentice Alteration, all 3 stages of Mage Armor, Expert Alteration, and Atronach. Master Alteration is not necessary because we're going to use Enchanting to reduce the cost of all alteration spells to 0 as well. The next important skill for the Stormbringer is Restoration. The only restoration spell you will need is Close Wounds, which restores 150 points of health when you have the appropriate perks. The restoration perks you will need are Novice Restoration, Regeneration, Apprentice Restoration, and Adept Restoration. Optional perks that can be useful but are not essential are Recovery, Avoid Death, and Respite. Next up we have Enchanting. Enchanting is also essential for the Stormbringer since it allows us to reduce the cost of all destruction and alteration spells to 0. I recommend leveling Enchanting to 100 as soon as you possibly can because the rest of the character will flow easily once you've done this. You'll want the following Enchanting perks: all 5 stages of Enchanter, Insightful Enchanter, Corpus Enchanter, and Extra Effect. Once you've done this, craft a set of gear with the enchantments shown on screen. The hood, circlet, necklace, and ring will make all destruction spells and all alteration spells cost 0 magicka. Your enchanted gloves will add extra magicka for you to cast spells from other schools of magic. Note that you will need to obtain Mirax gear for this setup, so I recommend that you complete the Dragonborn DLC as soon as possible. One thing you'll notice about this setup is it's actually not possible to wear a hood and a circlet at the same time in Skyrim, so you'll need to do one of 2 things to get around this. Option 1 is to download the Wear Circlets with Hoods mod. It is available for all platforms on Special Edition, and I'll leave a link to the mod in the description. My rationale for using a mod for the build is circlets really have no added benefit over helmets, so this mod actually makes circlets somewhat useful. Option 2 is to use a Falmer helmet or a Penitus Oculatus helmet instead of the hood. Due to a glitch, you can wear the Falmer helmet or the Penitus helmet with circlets simultaneously. Unfortunately, this will make the Mage Armor perk useless, but Dragonhide should still work fine, and that's the most important alteration spell anyways. The final skill for the Stormbringer, which is completely optional, is Conjuration. Unfortunately, there's a really dumb glitch in Skyrim where spell absorption affects your ability to use Conjuration. Because this character has 100% spell absorption, all spells cast upon her do nothing. But unfortunately, Conjuration spells count as spells cast on yourself, so all of your Conjuration spells will fail. Luckily, you can actually fix this using the unofficial Skyrim patch mod, which I've linked down in the description. It's available for Special Edition on all platforms and fixes a lot of other issues as well. If you don't want to download this, you'll have to pass on Conjuration, which actually isn't too big a deal since this character is plenty powerful without Conjuration. The main Conjuration spell you will need is Conjure Dremora Lord. You will also need the following perks in Conjuration: Novice Conjuration, Apprentice Conjuration, Adept Conjuration, Expert Conjuration, Summoner, Atromancy, Elemental Potency, and Twin Souls. If you plan to use Conjuration, you can summon 2 Dremora Lords at a time to distract your enemies. Then, simply stand back and incinerate them with Lightning Storm. Finally, let's talk about health, magicka, and stamina investment. If you're not planning on using Conjuration, I recommend 100% investment in health and 0% investment in magicka and stamina. 0 magicka investment probably sounds absurd for a mage character, but let me explain the reasoning behind this. The primary spells you'll use with this character are destruction and alteration spells, but we already used enchanting to reduce the cost of them to 0. The only restoration spell we're using with this character is Close Wounds, but with the appropriate perks and 100 restoration, this spell costs under 40 magicka to cast. The Fortify Magicka enchantment on our gloves will give us a total of around 160 magicka, meaning we can spam Close Wounds up to 4 times before running out of magicka. With each cast restoring around 150 points of health, we can restore 600 points of health in seconds. Therefore, the magicka investment is simply not needed. If you plan on using Conjuration, you will definitely need some magicka investment. My recommendation in this case is 50% investment in both health and magicka. This might all sound a little bit complicated, so I'm actually going to say that the most important thing is to use your own judgment and your own personal preferences when investing in health, magicka, and stamina. Despite my recommendations, you should ultimately do what you're most comfortable with here. Now let's discuss dealing with magic. If you pick up the Atronach stone and the Atronach perk, you'll gain 80% spell absorption, meaning there's an 80% chance that any spell cast upon you will be completely ineffective. If you get Mirax's robes and boots from the Dragonborn DLC, this will give you an additional 20% chance to absorb any incoming spell, for a total of 100% spell absorption. In other words, you'll be completely immune to magic. What's even better is Mirax's boots are not considered armor, so the Mage armor perk under Alteration will still take effect. Finally, let's talk about how to properly use this character. If your enemy only uses magic, dealing with them is simple. Because of your immunity to magic, they can't damage you at all, so just pull out Lightning Storm and annihilate them while they uselessly cast their spells against you. If your enemy is not a magic user, then paralyze them. Next, pull out Lightning Storm and destroy them while they're immobilized on the ground. If your enemy is not a magic user and is also immune to paralysis, pull out Dragonhide or Ebony Flesh and dual cast it. If you cast Ebony Flesh with Mage armor, this will give you around a 300 armor rating. If you dual cast Dragonhide, it will immediately put you at the maximum possible armor rating for 99 seconds, causing you to only take 20% damage from all physical attacks. It does take a while to charge up, so be sure to use Become Ethereal when you cast it. Alternatively, you can use Conjuration to summon Dromora Lords to take damage for you and distract your enemies. From here, use Lightning Storm to disintegrate your enemies. If you ever get low on health, pull out Close Wounds and spam it until you're back up to full. You won't get low on health too often though, seeing as how your character has extremely high health and resistances. Overall, this build is very overpowered if used correctly, and also doesn't require that many perks to achieve the optimal setup. But perhaps you disagree, and if that's the case, feel free to let me know down in the comments. I'm always open to feedback on these characters, be it on the backstory or on the character itself. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.